everything I've done has been because I encountered a need, something that wasn't working well in the UK, and then I tried to do something about it. I'm an engineer by training, and after school I did an engineering apprenticeship, and then I did a degree in engineering at Oxford, and I didn't seem to be very employable. So I thought, oh well, I'd better try and start a business. And I really wanted to start an engineering business, but I didn't think I'd be able to raise enough capital to do that. So I conceived the slightly unlikely idea of starting an American hamburger restaurant, and I was able to start the business. Having got the money, I had to find a site, which turned out to be in Bristol. I opened this restaurant, and the business began to grow, and it began to generate profits. And so after a bit, there was enough money in the bank to open the second restaurant. After 5 years, I had 3 restaurants in the chain. There were about 50 people employed, and the business was profitable. Looking back at the difficulty I had raising capital, so I thought I'd start a magazine, which was called Venture Capital Report. Eventually, we produced the first issue, which was in December 1978, and 30 people bought the first issue. And then by 1983, when Venture Capital Report had been running for 5 years, it became clear that the people who couldn't raise money at all were the scientists. When we wrote up a science idea, they didn't even get any inquiries. And when I thought about it, the reasons were very apparent. And they were that, investors on the whole don't understand science. And very sensibly, people don't like to invest in what they don't understand. One day in 1983, I was in the offices of a venture capital company in London, and I was bleating on at them. I was saying, it's no wonder this country's going to the dogs. You useless VCs who put your money into management buyouts and asset-backed ventures and things that are already profitable. And whenever anybody comes up with a real idea, you will run a mile. I'll tell you what, they said, if we give you £125,000, would you like to do 5 things of these lunatic sort of startups yourself and shut up? So I said, okay, you're on. So that was the beginning of what I've done ever since. And so that first £125,000 I invested in 5 things. And so the success of the first fund enabled me to raise a second and a third and a fourth and fifth. And we're currently investing, whatever it is, 12th fund or something. And we now do it under the SEIS scheme. I don't know what the numbers are, but huge numbers of businesses have been created which wouldn't have existed but for the SEIS scheme. So what we do in Oxford Technology, we spend our time talking to scientists. We get about 1,000 approaches a year, but that includes everything, But of those 1,000, about 100 are science startups, which is what we do. And we look at probably 20 of those in some detail, and then we make about 5 investments per year. And a typical investment for us is £75,000 in a PhD in a lab doing something interesting. Yes, well, what we don't mind how high the risks are, as long as if it all works, it'll be something significant. And typically our first investment is to do something very specific. So to build a first prototype of something, or to make the first sale of a product. We've done a recent investment we made, for example, it's a heated stretcher. When I first heard of that, I thought, goodness, that's such an obvious idea. How come nobody's done that before? And, the issue there is that particularly soldiers who are wounded in a war, in an area where it's cold, as in Ukraine in the winter where there's snow on the ground, or in Afghanistan where there's also snow on the ground, it can take many hours before you get rescued, and hypothermia is a big problem, and people die of cold. And so this stretcher is, it folds up and then it unfolds, and it's made of comfortable material, unlike a lot of existing stretchers, which are made of hard plastic. And then it has a military battery which plugs in and it keeps you warm. And then it's made out of X-ray translucent material. So when you get to a hospital, you can have an X-ray without being moved off the stretcher. And you do not want to move people who've been badly wounded and they're not joined up properly, and you don't want to move because you do a lot of damage if you do. Anyway, that seemed to us like a sort of wonderfully simple idea. And so we've invested in that. In our company, we only have one rule, which is not to have any rules. So we take each case on its merits. If you're a director, you are personally liable for debts that the company might have if it fails. And what do you get other than a title? So what we want to do is be informed, but we try not to be a director. So we really like it when the founders become multimillionaires, and we do very well as well. That's a success for what we're trying to do. Yes, I mean, the answer is it depends on the particular angel investing. I mean, generally, we try to avoid VCs if we can, because they tend to invest in, with preference shares and, anti-dilution clauses and all sorts of things. And we just invest in straight, ordinary shares. We've known some very complicated share structures with A shares and B shares and C shares and D shares and E shares and F shares, all with different rights. And when it comes to raising more money, the legal costs, and it can take 9 months to sort it all out. And the time it takes is, we move very fast. So we quite often see people at 10 o'clock, we agree to invest by 12, and then we give them the money the next day or the day after. I mean, very, very quick. We just have, it works absolutely fine. And then if the company goes on and raises, we've had one company in which we invested £100,000, which has now raised more than 50 million. And, when those bigger investors come in, they want new legal agreements anyway. So it doesn't matter what agreement we might have written in day one. You can't resist if somebody's investing 50 million and they say, we want to have this kind of thing. You just have to say yes. You can't do much about that. But what we can do is save the time and money on legal. And being able to raise money fast is so valuable to founders. When I was raising money to start my business, it took a couple of months for me to raise the money. And during that time, I didn't have any income. And it's like that for founders. And the damage that investors do who spend 6 months, making up their minds about whether to invest or not is immense.